We're continuing our thoughts here with pitfalls of youth ministry. We've covered two now. We've covered Mr. Entertainer and we've covered Mr. Ambition. So we're going to cover two and we're going to put these kind of together. I think you'll understand why. Again, I've named them all. And youth ministry and youth pastors that have come in and are working with youth, you'll understand these two, why we're putting them together. So the first one I entitled Mr. Brylcreem, B-R-Y-L, Cream, okay? Mr. Brylcreem. And then the second one is Mr. Hip Hop, or Mr. Joe Cool. I put these both together because they are very similar and they kind of work together. So let's talk about these two. First of all, Mr. Brylcreem. What do we mean by that? Well, he's a ladies' man. But let me give you a scenario. A youth pastor comes in. He's 25 years old. He's hired. He and his wife at 25, 26, 27 years old. They come into a situation. The youth pastor, normally, if you're going to be working with youth, you're pretty energetic, you're pretty excited, there's a lot of good ideas, fun, and you come into a youth group, and Mr. Brylcreem, as we're dealing with that one, the scenario is that many of the teenage girls will be attracted to that young man. I know he's married, and I know that he technically, you might say, is taken, but there's an excitement, and he's leading. Well, these young teenage girls are going to be looking up to that and saying, wow, man, this guy, he's got it all together, and all the young 14 or 15-year-old, man, they're just so silly, and they're not mature, and this guy seems mature, and yet he's so much fun. And then they're thinking about maybe their dad. He's older. He works at a warehouse, or he works in some trade that's out there, maybe in an electrician or a plumber or a welder or something. And it's not so exciting. It's not so flashy. And that dad is coming home and he's wore out. He doesn't have the energy. And some of it is because the teenagers are wearing him out. Well, they look at this young man and they say, man, I think he's got it together. You need to be careful. That's a pitfall to watch out for. And there need to be some protocol set up, some guidelines. What should there be? What guidelines? Well, one, there should be some separation. There should be some separation between you and the teenage girls, especially in those younger years. And by younger, I'm saying 25 to 30 to 35. Just be careful in those years, because those teenage girls are going to be gravitating to you. So be careful with that. So that's the separation there. Other thing that you can do to set up some protocol is in counseling. Your wife deals with most of the counseling with the young ladies, not you as a young man. And it's not saying that you don't do it. They should understand that you care for them, but you're going to work together. So if there is counseling that you need to do with the young ladies, then you're going to do it together. You're going to work together. Again, you're developing a relationship with mom and dad anyways, because we talked about that in some other lectures, but you're developing those relationships. So the counseling is with your wife, but then you're talking to mom and dad, either a phone call and saying, hey, this is going on. You're having a meeting, you're grabbing them at church, saying, hey, these are some things going on. That's going to then lessen that relationship. Then the ladies, your wife, and other ladies that are helping out, they're in charge and monitoring the girls. So if it's maybe at prayer time, they take the girls. Maybe some split sessions, your wife takes the girls. So the ladies are building those relationships with the girls. The last thing with this idea of Mr. Brylcreem is, if you as a youth pastor and in your youth ministry, if you concentrate on building men, it's very important. There is a tendency in some churches to just concentrate on the females. There's nothing wrong with the females coming along and doing things, but concentrate as a youth pastor on building those men. You'll be rewarded in years to come, and that will help you. Along with this, so we said there's two of them that we're putting together. We got Mr. Brylcreem, that kind of the ladies' man, but then we got Mr. Joe Cool. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, maybe it's that he wants fame. He wants to be the world's greatest youth pastor. He's wanting to gain favor. Young leaders must also learn to die to self. That's biblically instructed to us. We're going to learn to die to self. And we understand that working with youth, and there's going to be excitement, and you're going to have some times where, there's just, it seems like there's a great attraction maybe in the church to you as a youth pastor. That's great and that's fine. But remember, as a youth pastor, that's not the goal. The goal is not that all the teens are going to vote you the greatest youth pastor in America or in the world. That's not the goal. The goal is that your ministry is bringing glory to God. The goal is to have young people that are turning out for God. And sometimes then that means this, that because of some of the things you have to deal with within the home, or some of the things that you're dealing with these young people, it's not going to make you the most popular person. So what do you have to do? You have to then be looking at Scripture and understanding that loving not the world and the things of this world. And one of those things is fame. Not just fortune, not just wealth and materialism, things like that, but fame. It can draw you in. What is it? The pride of man. All right, the pride of man. It's a snare, and we need to understand that. So Mr. Joe Cruel, what is he doing? Mr. Hip Hop, as we might call it. You need to be careful as a youth man that your language. I remember this very early as I was starting into youth ministry. I realized very early that the things that I said became catchphrases. Now, I am very sarcastic. I am very, I like joking. And so I joke with teenagers all the time. I nickname people. And that always wasn't a good thing. Because what happens is that you notice funny things about someone, and so you pick it up. Well, the other teenagers take it and they run with it, and it ends up hurting that teenager. So what do you have to do? Remember that your language, be mature with your language. Your dress, be overly conservative. It's not saying that you have to wear, if I'm right now in 2016, it's not that I have to wear 70s attire. It's not I have to wear polyester suits. No, I think it's important that they see that you take care of yourself. That's a whole nother lesson in itself, as and teaching them different propriety and teaching them to care for themselves and to be a gentleman or to be a lady. There are good teachings that need to be done, and some of that has to do with their dress. But you need to be careful that you're not always in the latest of fashion. Your hairdo is not the latest, whether it's your glasses or maybe it's some type of shoes or different things. Be careful that your language, your dress is not always right on the edge. You cannot do that. Your dress and your language cannot be on the edge. The other thing that I remember learning this with Mr. Hip Hop, Mr. Joe Cool, is let's say you grew up playing sports. What you need to understand is that in the area of athletics, they can be a good thing. But in the area of athletics, when you're playing with those young people, don't cross the line. I grew up playing athletics different sports, and I love playing those sports. But at a certain point, I realized that I was kind of crossing the line, and I was becoming too competitive with the young people. And then I was going to lose respect. Why? Well, because I wanted to win so bad that it was becoming a competition then. And I no longer was an authority. What did I do? I stepped onto that playing court. And on that playing court, it needs to be a fair playing court. So if it's in baseball or softball or basketball or volleyball, it needed to be that if I was going to come in and play, I couldn't also be the youth pastor that's yelling at them, because then you're not right with God because you fouled me. And it becomes a competitive thing, and it becomes a problem. So watch that even with the athletics and in your actions. So Mr. Hip Hop, Mr. Joe Cool, the pitfalls that we're talking about here is language, dress, athletics, and your actions. Be careful with those things, because Mr. Joe Cool, what he's doing is he doesn't realize that these teens are looking up to him. You've been put into a place of leadership to guide these folks, these young people, into more godliness. Remember that. It's into more godliness, not to be you. And so be careful. Then in the area of Mr. Brylcreem being the ladies' man, remember that there needs to be some separation. Build your men. That'll help you out. We're doing our last session. Remember, we've talked about the pitfalls of youth ministry, and we've covered a number of them now. We covered Mr. Entertainer, Mr. Ambition, covered Mr. Brylcreem, he was the ladies' man, and Mr. Hip Hop, he is Mr. Joe Cool. And we have the last one that we're going to be looking at, and that is Mr. Insubordinate. Mr. Insubordinate. You know, teenagers are coming into the youth group, and they need somebody that understands authority. They need somebody that understands that it has that in line. So we're going to look at a couple of ideas with this Mr. Insubordinate. The scriptures encourage leadership, and they also warn about leadership, and especially they warn about youth. Let me show you a couple passages. Remember, a great thing to study with young people is Timothy. And in 1 Timothy chapter 4, we've read this verse in verse 12. Let no man, what? Despise thy youth. So he's telling them, don't let them despise it. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, it says that if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. But then later on, one of the things it says, not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. So one of the pitfalls of of youth ministries, youth groups, youth pastors is Mr. Insubordinate. He doesn't understand his place. One of our biggest and most pernicious temptations is pride. It's a young youth pastor, he is young, obviously, he's full of ideas, feel like you can change the world, and that's good. But it also can be bad when it seals us off from needed authority that is going to help and lead and guide us. So Mr. Ambition, or not Mr. Ambition, Mr. Insubordinate. There's two areas that we're going to deal with quickly here with Mr. Insubordinate. First of all, you have a place with the pastor. Then there's your place with the parents. So let's first look at this idea of your place with the pastor. Many churches, there's not a good relationship with the pastor and the youth pastor. It's like a bad marriage. It's like a bad boss and a bad boss employee-employer relationship. And so what do we mean by that? Well, there needs to be a good working relationship. So what are some things that can help you with a good relationship with your pastor? Well, one, there should be loyalty. And this is a two-way street. The youth pastor needs to have loyalty to the pastor, but the pastor should have loyalty to the youth pastor. Remember that now I've been in both situations. And so as the youth pastor, I wanted to make sure to understand my pastor's philosophy. I wanted to make sure that I worked and worked to gain an understanding so that when I was talking to somebody, I realized I was an extension of the pastor. Because of that, I need to have his mindset. So hundreds of hours were spent in going through things so that I understood that mindset. And then now on the other side, I want my youth pastor to know what I am thinking as a pastor. But then when somebody comes to me and talks about maybe something about the youth pastor, I'm not going to throw the youth pastor under the bus. I understand he's loyal to me. I understand that he has loyalty, and so I'm gonna back him. I'm gonna help. We're gonna help resolve this situation because I know his heart. So in this area, there should be loyalty. Then another major consideration that will help you in this pitfall of Mr. Insubordinate is be content to play second fiddle. Playing second fiddle, there's not room for egos. You need to understand that. And then you have to have an open relationship. So there should be talking all the time. Be able to give opinions. And that's back and forth. And so, what are we saying? The goal is to act as your pastor would act in a situation, but also, though, that you can be your own man. That's the idea of playing second fiddle. So there's loyalty, there's contentment, there's openness, there's submission. And with that idea, you need to be able to not so fall in love with your idea that you think this is the idea that's going to change the youth world. And the pastor says, "No, I don't want to do that now," that you just got so bent out of shape. You're playing second fiddle. The pastor sees a bigger picture. Understand that. So in Mr. Insubordinate, make sure that you know your place with the pastor. And then the second part is make sure you know your place with the parents. And what do we mean by that? Well, don't get caught taking sides. You know, teenagers can have complicated relationships with their parents. And some youth will come and they think a way to build a relationship with the youth pastor is to put a gap between the parents and the youth pastor. Don't fall into that trap. It's a pitfall. Know your place with the young people and the parents. The teenagers are remarkably gifted at seeing hypocrisy. Yet, they lack the wisdom of knowing that nobody's perfect. And so they see all these problems with their parents, but what they don't realize is that they have all kinds of problems, and when they're a parent, they're not going to be perfect either. And so they don't have the maturity to understand that, and so they look at that and they see that as hypocrisy when it's just there is nobody perfect. So don't forget that you are talking to a biased person there with when it comes to this young person. Remember that they have a take on it and they're biased in a certain way. And you need to be careful. So make sure that you know your place in dealing with the parents. Make sure you're not just coming in and taking the side of this young person. But then on the other side, remember that you're here to be a help to both the young person and the parent. And it could be that there's a strained relationship and God brings you into the situation because you're an outsider and you're able to help both communicate better. If God allows you to do that, then that's what you should do. but make sure that you're not being used to be pitted one against the other, because there is no good outcome there. All right, if the parent, and I've had this happen, all right, if the parent wants you to be the disciplinarian, but they will not discipline at home, you do not want to do that. Okay? If the child has a bad relationship and they want you to be the person that basically is yelling at the parents, do not do that. Okay? You are a help for those teenagers as a youth pastor, but remember, your job is not rearing those young people. You're there to help. You're to be a tool for the parent so that they can better equip their young people to serve God. So we see that here in Mr. Insubordinate. Mr. Insubordinate is a pitfall that some people fall into. And what does it mean? It means that they don't understand their place. They don't understand their place with the pastor. They don't understand their place with the parent. And it's not saying that you're just a doormat. It's not saying that. But you should be able to have opinions. You should be able to work as a man in these situations, but understand your place. That'll help you to avoid this pitfall of Mr. Insubordinate.